How many humiliations must a child endure until someone finally says enough? Within a school that claims to be inclusive, a scholarship girl is treated as though she doesn't belong. While everyone else looks the other way, another student decides she will no longer stay silent in the face of injustice, and it is this small act of courage that ignites the flame of a truth that no one can ignore any longer. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now on with the story. Robert Allen never imagined that starting his life over would be as difficult as losing the person he loved most. At 43, this successful businessman, owner of a supermarket chain with stores throughout the state of California, saw his world collapse when Marina, his wife, passed away after a long and painful illness. The apartment in Los Angeles, once filled with laughter and plans, transformed into a museum of silence. Every corner of the house held a memory. The coffee cup Marina always left in the same spot on the counter, the perfume that still lingered in the closet, the children's book she used to read to little Beatrice before bed. Beatrice was only 7 when she lost her mother. She was a girl with curly brown hair, curious green eyes, and a smile that Robert fought every day to keep alive. In the first few months after Marina's passing, the girl began to have nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night calling for her mother, and Robert felt completely lost, not knowing how to fill the immense void that had settled in his daughter's heart. The company meetings, which once took up most of his time, were delegated to his partners. Robert realized that no profit, no multi-million-dollar contract was worth more than being present for Beatrice. It was on a rainy afternoon in March, while flipping through magazines in the office of the child psychologist Beatrice was seeing, that Robert read an article about inland Californian cities that offered a better quality of life for families. The text talked about Pasadena, a city large enough to have all the necessary infrastructure, but with quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods where children still played on the sidewalks and neighbors greeted each other. That image touched something deep within him. Los Angeles was the city of business, of frantic movement, but it was also the city where everything reminded him of Marina. Perhaps a new beginning somewhere else could bring some peace to him and Beatrice. The decision wasn't easy. His partners were surprised when Robert announced he would be running the company remotely, only holding monthly strategic meetings in Los Angeles. Marina's family, especially his mother-in-law, Mrs. Clark, felt abandoned, but Robert was determined. He sold the apartment, kept only a small office in the city, and in June of that year he and Beatrice moved to a gated community in Pasadena, in a leafy, quiet neighborhood full of charming squares and cozy cafes. The new house was spacious, with a garden where Beatrice could play, and a porch that overlooked a green area. In the first few days, everything was new. The girl explored every corner, chose the room with a view of the trees, and Robert began to feel that perhaps this move could really be good for them both, but there was a constant worry: Beatrice's education. In Los Angeles, she attended a renowned private school, had friends and teachers who had known her since she was 4. Starting over also meant finding a new school, and Robert didn't want to make the wrong choice. That's when he discovered Harmony Academy, a private institution located in a nearby neighborhood, which stood out for its progressive and humanistic approach. The school's website showed photos of smiling children in colorful classrooms, teachers hugging students, social projects, and an entire section dedicated to inclusion and welcoming. Robert scheduled a visit and was received by the principal, Dr. Sylvia Meadows, an elegant woman in her 50s with an articulate speech about transformative education and human values. During the visit, Dr. Meadows showed him the facilities: a well-equipped library, science labs, a covered court, an art room. But what impressed Robert the most was the social project the school was developing. The principal explained that Harmony Academy had a scholarship foundation for children from socially vulnerable situations. The idea was not only to offer quality education, but also to promote coexistence between children from different realities, teaching empathy and social responsibility from an early age. Robert felt that it made sense. After everything he had been through with the loss of Marina, he wanted Beatrice to grow up in an environment where human values were truly practiced, not just preached. The principal noticed his interest and with a warm smile made a proposal. What if Robert became one of the foundation's sponsors? The investment would help increase the number of scholarships, provide uniforms, school supplies, and even psychological support for the beneficiary children. Robert, still fragile from the pain of his loss and searching for a purpose that would bring some meaning to this new chapter of his life, accepted without hesitation. He signed a generous sponsorship contract and enrolled Beatrice in the school. Beatrice's first days at Harmony Academy were a period of adjustment. The girl, naturally shy after all she had been through, took a while to open up. But she soon began to make friends. Her second-grade teacher was a young, friendly woman named Clara, who always greeted her with a smile and encouraged her to participate in activities. Robert felt relieved to see his daughter coming home talking about her classes, her classmates, the drawings she made. It was late one afternoon, 3 months after the move, that Robert met Veronica Lester. She was a middle school literature teacher at Harmony Academy, but she also participated in some extracurricular activities. Veronica was 38 years old, with straight black hair always impeccably styled, an elegant way of dressing, and an impressive ability to articulate ideas. They met at a foundation meeting, where she was presenting the results of the reading project she coordinated with the scholarship students. Robert was enchanted by the way Veronica spoke about education, about the importance of giving opportunities to children born into difficult circumstances, about how a book could change someone's life. There was a genuine passion in her voice, a sparkle in her eyes when she described the students' progress. After the meeting, they talked for almost an hour in the school parking lot. Veronica told him she was divorced, had no children, and dedicated her life to teaching. Robert talked about Marina, about the pain of loss, about Beatrice, and about how he was trying to rebuild their lives in this new city. In the following months, Robert and Veronica began to see each other more frequently. First at school events, then for dinners, coffee, walks, in the park. Veronica had an engaging way of listening, always attentive, always with a word of comfort or a sensible piece of advice. Beatrice, who was initially reserved around the new female figure in her father's life, gradually opened up. Veronica was patient with the girl, brought small gifts, took an interest in the drawings Beatrice made, and asked about her classes. She seemed genuinely interested in building a healthy relationship with her stepdaughter. In November, almost 6 months after they met, Veronica moved into Robert's house. The transition was careful, gradual. Veronica brought her books, her plants, and slowly began to occupy spaces in the house without imposing herself. Robert felt that finally, after so much suffering, life was starting to make sense again. Beatrice seemed happier, more relaxed. Veronica prepared delicious dinners, helped the girl with her homework, and organized outings on the weekends. The photos they posted on social media showed a happy family. Robert embracing Veronica and Beatrice, the three of them smiling in front of a sunset at the park, dinners at home with a bountiful, well-decorated table. At the beginning of the following year, there were changes in the organization of Harmony Academy. The teacher Clara, who was the head of the 3rd grade, where Beatrice was now studying, went on maternity leave. The pedagogical coordination decided that Veronica, recognized for her dedication and competence, would temporarily take over the class. Robert thought it was great. Beatrice would have her stepmother as a teacher, which, in his view, would make the adaptation and her academic monitoring even easier. Veronica took over the class with her characteristic style, organized, demanding, but always with a discourse on constructive discipline and respectful education. At the first parent-teacher meeting, she presented her methodology, spoke about the importance of clear rules, and explained how she was implementing a reward system for good behavior and good grades. The parents left impressed. Robert, proud, saw in Veronica not only a partner, but an exemplary educator who was shaping his daughter's character. In the classroom, Veronica was impeccable with Beatrice. She praised the girl's neat handwriting, the way she answered questions, and her polite manner with classmates. Beatrice thrived under this praise, coming home excited, showing off the golden stars her stepmother stuck in her notebooks. Robert saw this as confirmation that he had made the right decision in moving to Pasadena, enrolling his daughter in that school and opening his heart to Veronica. But it was also at the beginning of that school year that Beatrice met Julia. Julia Sanders was an 8-year-old girl with curly hair usually tied in a crooked bun, a uniform that was always a bit too big, and a look that mixed shyness with a strange maturity. She was one of the scholarship students from the foundation Robert sponsored. Julia lived with her grandmother, Mrs. Marlene Evans, in a simple house in a working-class neighborhood on the other side of town. Julia's mother had left when she was a baby, and her father was never present. Mrs. Evans worked as a cleaner in 3 different houses to support them both, leaving before dawn and returning late in the afternoon, exhausted. Julia was a quiet girl who tried to go unnoticed. She often arrived late because she depended on 2 buses to get to school. Sometimes she came without a snack because her grandmother hadn't had time to prepare one, or because money was tight at the end of the month. Her clothes, though clean, were visibly worn, mended in some places. Her hair was often messy because Mrs. Evans left too early to help her with it, and Julia didn't yet know how to do the hairstyles the other girls wore. On the first day of school, Beatrice and Julia sat next to each other by chance. During break time, Beatrice noticed that Julia had no snack. Without a second thought, the girl offered half of her sandwich. Julia hesitated but accepted with a shy smile. From that day on, the two began to form a bond. Beatrice, who came from a reality of comfort and protection, was fascinated by the stories Julia told about the 2 buses she took alone, about her grandmother who woke up when it was still dark, about the stray dog that lived in their backyard, which Julia called Thunder. The 2 girls were different in almost every way, but they complemented each other in a strange and beautiful way. Beatrice would lend her colored pencils to Julia for her projects, and Julia would teach Beatrice street games she had never seen before. During recess, they were always together, sharing snacks, secrets, and laughter. Beatrice began to understand for the first time in her life that not everyone had a big house, a room full of toys, or someone to comb their hair every morning, and that touched her in a way she couldn't yet explain. But it was also in those first few weeks of school that Beatrice began to notice something strange. Her stepmother, who was always so sweet to her at home, had a completely different way of speaking to Julia. In front of the class, Veronica would praise Beatrice for anything: the color of her pencil case, the way she sat up straight in her chair, how quickly she finished her activities. But with Julia, the tone changed. Veronica would make comments about the girl's messy hair, ask out loud in front of everyone why she hadn't come with her notebook covered like the others, why her uniform was so wrinkled. One day, Julia arrived late because the bus had broken down. She entered the room out of breath, apologizing. Veronica stopped the lesson, looked at the girl, and said in a cold tone that lateness would not be tolerated, that Julia needed to learn to be more organized, that this was a serious school and that scholarship students had to set an example. The entire class fell silent. Julia lowered her head, mumbled another apology, and went to sit at the back of the room. Beatrice looked at her friend and saw her eyes welling up. She felt something strange in her chest, a mixture of anger and helplessness. As the days went by, the situation only worsened. Veronica began to use Julia as a negative example in front of the class. When a student forgot to do their homework, she would say, "Don't be like Julia, who is always disorganized." When someone answered a question incorrectly, she would comment, "See, even Julia got this one right, it's not that hard." Julia became more and more withdrawn, speaking less and less, avoiding eye contact with the teacher. Beatrice saw it all and felt a growing fear, an anguish she couldn't name. At home, when Beatrice tried to mention how her stepmother treated Julia, Veronica always had a convincing explanation. She would say that Julia needed clear boundaries because she came from an unstructured environment, that it was her role as an educator to be firm, so the girl would learn discipline, that it was for her own good. Robert, who trusted Veronica blindly, agreed. He thought his partner was doing the best she could in a difficult context, so Beatrice would fall silent, but the weight in her chest didn't lessen. One morning, Julia arrived at school with her uniform stained with what looked like tomato sauce. She explained, embarrassed, that her grandmother had forgotten to wash it and that was the only uniform she had. Veronica called the girl to the front of the class, looked at the stain, and said in a tone that tried to sound educational, but was laced with contempt. "Julia, you can't come to school like this. It's a lack of respect for the institution and your classmates. How do you expect to be taken seriously if you can't even keep your uniform clean?" Julia tried to explain, but Veronica interrupted her. "I don't want excuses. I want a solution. Tomorrow, you will come with an impeccable uniform, or I will have to speak with the administration about your continued enrollment here." Beatrice felt tears burning in her eyes. She looked at Julia, who stood with her head down, trembling. She looked at the other classmates who averted their gaze, afraid of being the next target. And she looked at her stepmother, the woman who hugged her at home, prepared dinners, and told her she loved her. How was it possible that the same person could be so cruel to a child who just needed help? That afternoon, Beatrice returned home in silence. Robert noticed his daughter was acting strange and asked if everything was okay at school. Beatrice said yes, but her eyes told a different story. Veronica, always attentive, quickly changed the subject, praising Beatrice for an activity she had done, diverting the attention. Robert, tired from a day full of meetings, accepted the peaceful narrative his partner presented and didn't press further. But Beatrice couldn't stop thinking about Julia. That night, lying in bed, hugging the teddy bear her mother had given her, she made a decision. She had to do something. She didn't know exactly what, but she knew she couldn't just watch her friend be humiliated day after day. Because if it could happen to Julia, it could happen to any child who didn't have someone powerful to defend them. And Beatrice, even though she was only an 8-year-old girl, already understood that silence in the face of injustice was, in a way, complicity. In the following days, Beatrice began to observe everything more closely. She noticed that her stepmother always behaved impeccably when other adults were around, but that inside the classroom, when it was just her and the students, her tone changed completely. She noticed that Julia wasn't the only target, but she was undoubtedly the one who suffered the most. She noticed that other scholarship students were also treated with exaggerated rigor, with sharp comments about their clothes, their supplies, their lateness. Beatrice didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt, with all the strength of her child's heart, that it was wrong. And something inside her, perhaps the memory of her mother who always taught her about kindness and justice, perhaps her own innocence that hadn't yet been corrupted by fear or convenience, told her she had to do something, even if she was just a girl, even if the person causing that pain was the one who slept in her house every night, who prepared her dinner, who her father loved. And it was in that moment, in the anguished silence of her room, that Beatrice began to devise a plan that would change everything. Beatrice woke up that Thursday with an idea that had kept her from sleeping well. As she ate breakfast, she watched her father read the news on his tablet and Veronica prepare her school lunch. The scene was one of absolute normality, but the girl knew there was something deeply wrong with that apparent harmony. How is it possible that this woman, who was now cutting an apple into perfect slices and carefully placing them in a container, was the same one who yesterday had made Julia stand in the corner of the room for 15 minutes because she had forgotten her math book at home? The idea had come to her the night before, when Beatrice remembered a scene she had witnessed weeks ago. Robert had been in his office on an important virtual meeting with his business partners, and she had accidentally walked in. Her father had asked her to be quiet while he finished. Beatrice watched and saw that, besides the computer with the camera on, there was a small black device on the desk, blinking a little red light. Later, when the meeting was over, she asked what it was. Robert explained that it was an audio recorder, which he used to record important meetings so he wouldn't forget any details of what was agreed upon. That stuck in Beatrice's mind. A recorder, a small device that saved voices, conversations, things people said. If she could record what happened inside the classroom, if she could show her father how Veronica really treated Julia when no one was watching, maybe he would finally believe her. Because every time Beatrice tried to tell him, Veronica had a ready explanation, and Robert always sided with her. But a recording, that would be different. That would be real proof. The problem was getting the recorder. Beatrice knew her father kept the device in a desk drawer in his office, but how could she take it without him noticing? All day at school, while Veronica taught English and corrected grammar exercises, Beatrice couldn't pay attention. Her mind was too busy planning how to execute her plan. Beside her, Julia copied from the board with a tired slowness, and Beatrice could see the dark circles under her friend's eyes. Julia had told her at recess that her grandmother was sick, with a bad cough, but couldn't miss work or she wouldn't have money to pay the rent. That same day, something happened that made Beatrice absolutely certain she needed to act fast. It was science class, and the students were studying the solar system. Veronica had asked each student to make a model at home, showing the planets. Beatrice had made hers with her father's help, using styrofoam balls, colorful paints, and even a base with LED lights. It turned out beautifully, and Robert had been very proud of his daughter's work. Julia had made one too, but it was much simpler. Papier-mâché balls painted with gouache, hung by strings in a cardboard box. When it was her turn to present, Beatrice showed her model and Veronica praised it effusively, saying that it was the result of dedication and care, that this was how she expected all students to do their work. Then it was Julia's turn. The girl carried her model carefully, visibly proud of the effort she had put in, but when she placed it on the teacher's desk, Veronica looked at it, made a face and said, loud enough for the whole class to hear, "Julia, this is very poorly made. The planets are crooked. The paint is peeling. It looks like you did it in 5 minutes. This is not acceptable. You get a D for this." Julia tried to explain that she had made it with what she had at home, that her grandmother had helped her even though she was sick, that she had tried very hard. But Veronica cut her off. "I don't want to hear excuses. If you want to study at a good school, you need to present quality work. The other students managed. Why can't you?" The girl returned to her desk with tears in her eyes, holding the model that suddenly seemed so ugly, so inadequate. Beatrice looked at her own perfect model with its blinking lights and felt an immense shame. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right to compare what she, who had everything, could do with what Julia, who barely had supplies, could create. That afternoon, when she got home, Beatrice waited for the right moment. Robert was taking a shower after returning from a meeting, and Veronica had gone out to the supermarket. The house was quiet. Beatrice went to her father's office, her heart pounding in her chest. She slowly opened the drawer where she knew her recorder was kept. There it was, small, black, with simple buttons. She took it, hid it in her pants pocket, closed the drawer carefully, and ran back to her room. She locked the door, sat on her bed, and stared at the little device. It was so small, so simple, yet it held so much power. With this, she could finally prove what was happening. She tested it to see if it worked. She pressed the red button, said a few words, pressed the stop button, and then play. Her own voice came out of the small speaker. It worked. Beatrice smiled, but it was a sad, heavy smile. An 8-year-old child shouldn't have to do this. She shouldn't have to hide a recorder in her backpack to prove that an adult was being cruel to another child. On Friday, Beatrice woke up with a knot in her stomach. She put the recorder inside her pencil case at the bottom, under the pencils and pens. She ate breakfast trying to act normal, said goodbye to her father and Veronica, and went to school. During the entire car ride with the driver Robert had hired, she clutched the pencil case to her chest as if she could protect her secret with the sheer force of her arms. The class started normally. Veronica entered the room with her professional smile, greeted the students, and began taking attendance. When Julia answered, "Present," Beatrice noticed her friend's voice was hoarse, tired. During recess, Julia told her that her grandmother had gotten worse, that she had been up all night applying compresses, that she had barely slept. Beatrice hugged her friend and said everything would be okay, but inside she felt a huge anguish. Julia was exhausted, sick with worry, and still had to come at a school to face a teacher who humiliated her every day. Back in the classroom, Beatrice waited for a moment when Veronica was distracted, writing on the board, discreetly opened her pencil case, found the recorder by touch, and pressed the red button. The tiny light began to blink. It was recording. Beatrice slowly closed the case, placed it on her desk, close enough to capture everything that was said, and pretended to pay attention to the lesson. It didn't take long for something to happen. Veronica asked the students to open their history books to page 73. Julia searched and realized that those pages had been torn from her book. It must have happened when the book fell out of her backpack on the crowded bus days ago. The girl timidly raised her hand and said she didn't have those pages. Veronica stopped, turned slowly, and walked to Julia's desk. She looked at the book, looked at the girl, and said in an icy tone, "Again, Julia. There's always an excuse, isn't there? Either your grandmother is sick, or the bus was late, or the book is torn. When are you going to learn to be responsible?" Julia mumbled an apology, but Veronica didn't stop. "You know what I think? I think you don't value the opportunity you're being given. There are children who would give anything to be in your place, and you come here every day with excuse after excuse. Perhaps this scholarship is being wasted on you. Maybe we should give it to someone who actually wants to study." The entire room fell silent. Julia lowered her head, and Beatrice saw a tear roll down her friend's face. She felt an immense anger building inside her chest, but she controlled herself. She needed to. Let the recorder capture everything. She needed to have the complete proof. Veronica continued, "You will copy the pages from Beatrice's book during recess. No break for you today. You need to learn that everything has a consequence." And so it was. During recess, while the other students went out to play, Julia stayed in the classroom copying page after page, her hand aching, her eyes burning from exhaustion and humiliation. Beatrice stayed with her, even though Veronica had said she could go. The girl insisted she wanted to help her friend, and her stepmother, unable to refuse without seeming even more cruel, allowed it. But before leaving, she cast a strange look at Beatrice, a look the girl couldn't interpret. Was it concern, suspicion, anger? Throughout that week, Beatrice brought the recorder to school. Every day she recorded the classes, Veronica's sharp comments, the veiled humiliations, the threats about taking away the scholarship. The small device accumulated hours and hours of recording. Beatrice listened to it all at night, alone in her room, with headphones, and with every cruel phrase she heard, she felt her heart tighten more. How was it possible that no one else noticed what was happening? How could the other teachers, the administration, the principal not see anything? But someone was seeing. Camille Fisher was 26 years old and had been a pedagogical assistant at Harmony Academy for only 8 months. It was her first job after finishing her degree in education, and she was full of dreams and ideals about transformative education. Camille had grown up in a simple neighborhood in Pasadena, attended public school her whole life, and had gotten into a state university through sheer effort. She believed deeply that education was the path to changing lives, which was why she was so enthusiastic when she was hired by Harmony Academy, especially to work with the scholarship project. But in recent weeks, Camille had been bothered by something she couldn't ignore. She moved between classrooms, observed lessons, helped teachers with activities, and had begun to notice a strange pattern in Veronica's behavior. The teacher was adored by the parents, had an impeccable resume, but Camille noticed that the scholarship students always seemed more tense, more withdrawn when they were in her class, especially Julia. Camille had spoken to Julia a few times in the hallway, asking if everything was okay, if she was enjoying her classes. The girl always said yes, but her eyes said something else. There was fear there was exhaustion, there was a sadness that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old child. Camille tried to talk to the pedagogical coordinator, Ms. Martin, about her concerns, but Ms. Martin was emphatic. "Veronica is one of our best teachers. She is demanding because she cares. These scholarship students come from difficult backgrounds and need strict discipline to adapt. We can't confuse firmness with cruelty." That response left Camille even more uneasy. Firmness. What she was seeing went beyond firmness. It was something more subtle, more perverse. It was a form of humiliation that left no visible marks but shattered the children's self-esteem little by little, day after day. Camille began to write down things she saw and heard, comments about the scholarship students' appearance, cruel comparisons between them and the paying students, veiled threats about losing the scholarship. She kept it all in a notebook locked in her desk drawer. It was on a Wednesday afternoon that something definitively changed. Camille needed to get some materials from Veronica's classroom during class time. She knocked on the door, entered, and what she saw left her cold. Julia was standing in a corner of the room, facing the wall, while Veronica taught normally as if nothing was happening. The girl was trembling, clearly trying to hold back tears. Camille asked what was happening, and Veronica replied with a frightening naturalness that Julia was in time out for being disrespectful. Camille looked at the girl, who said nothing, just continued to stare at the wall. That night, Camille couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Julia, about that image of the girl standing in the corner, humiliated in front of her classmates. She thought about her own childhood, when she had been the poor kid in the class, about how sensitive teachers had made all the difference in her life, how they had believed in her when few others did. And she thought about how, if she had had a teacher like Veronica, she might never have gotten where she was. On Thursday, Camille requested a meeting with the principal, Dr. Meadows. She brought her notes, told her what she had seen, and expressed her concerns. But the principal was even more emphatic than the coordinator. "Camille, you are young, just starting your career. Veronica has over 15 years of experience. She knows what she's doing. These students need clear boundaries. We can't be too permissive. If we are lenient with lateness, poorly done work, lack of organization, we will be harming these children in the future. The real world won't take pity on them." Camille left that meeting feeling powerless, small, invisible. She was just an assistant, a newly hired employee, with no power within that structure. But something inside her couldn't give up. She continued to observe, continued to take notes, waiting for the right moment to act, because she knew that sooner or later the truth would have to come out, and the truth was closer than she imagined. That same week, on a rainy Friday, the incident occurred that would make Beatrice make her final decision. The class was taking a math test. Julia, who had spent the night caring for her worsening grandmother, was exhausted and had trouble concentrating. She made a mistake on a simple calculation. Veronica, while grading the tests during class, called Julia to the front of the room, showed her the mistake and said, "Look, everyone, Julia can't even do a basic addition problem. Maybe math is too difficult for her. Maybe she should go back to a simpler school, where the level is more suited to her abilities." If you were in Beatrice's shoes, would you keep recording or confront your stepmother right then and there? Tell us in the comments. Julia returned to her desk, completely shattered. Beatrice looked at her friend and saw that something inside her had broken. It wasn't just silent tears anymore. It was a deep sadness, a shame that seemed to have taken over her entire being. Julia lowered her head onto her desk and didn't move for the rest of the class. She didn't even want to get up for recess. Beatrice stayed by her side, holding her hand, whispering that she was smart, that she was good at math, that it was all a lie. But the words didn't seem to reach her friend. That afternoon, when she got home, Beatrice couldn't take it anymore. She waited for her father to get home from work, waited for him to take off his jacket and sit in the living room armchair. Veronica was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Beatrice went into her father's office, closed the door behind her, and said in a voice that tried to be firm but was trembling, "Dad, I need to show you something important." Robert looked at his daughter and saw something different in her eyes. This wasn't the cheerful girl who came home from school talking about recess games. This was someone older, heavier, someone carrying a weight far too great for her 8 years. He asked what it was, and Beatrice, with trembling hands, took the recorder out of her backpack pocket and placed it on the desk. "This, Dad, you need to listen to this, but alone. Promise you'll listen." "To it alone?" Robert picked up the device, looked at his daughter with a mixture of confusion and concern, and promised. Beatrice left the office, leaving her father there, holding that small black object that was about to shatter the entire reality he had built over the past few months. She went to her room, lay on her bed, and waited. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she could no longer stay silent. Julia deserved justice. All those children deserved justice. And now everything depended on Robert having the courage to listen. Robert stared at the recorder for a few seconds after Beatrice left. The object seemed so harmless, so small in his hand. It was the same device he used for corporate meetings, to record important agreements, contract details. He never imagined it would be used by his own daughter for something so mysterious, so urgent. The way Beatrice had entered the office, the seriousness on her face, the tremor in her hands, it all made him uneasy. He glanced at the door, heard the sounds of the house. Veronica in the kitchen, the clatter of pans, running water, the usual domestic normality. He took a deep breath and pressed the play button. At first he only heard muffled noises, the sound of a backpack being rummaged through, distant voices of children. Then, clear and unmistakable, Veronica's voice wishing the class good morning, asking everyone to open their notebooks, a normal class. Robert almost turned it off, thinking maybe Beatrice had recorded it by mistake, that there was nothing important there. But then it began. Veronica's tone shifted as she addressed someone. "Julia, why is your uniform wrinkled again? How many times do I have to tell you this isn't acceptable? Do you think you're just anywhere? This is a serious school." Robert frowned. The tone was harsh, impatient, completely different from the affectionate Veronica he knew. He kept listening. A little girl's voice, small, scared, trying to explain something about her grandmother being sick. And Veronica cutting her off. "I don't want excuses. I want you to learn to present yourself properly. The others can do it. Why can't you?" Robert felt a growing discomfort in his chest. He fast-forwarded the recording. More classes, more comments. "Julia, you came without your homework again. It's always the same thing. Perhaps this scholarship is being wasted. It's on you." The voice was cold, calculated, laden with barely disguised contempt. Robert paused the recording, ran a hand over his face. This couldn't be happening. Veronica was an experienced educator, a woman who spoke with such passion about transforming lives through education. How could she be treating a child this way? He continued listening, now with painful attention. Hours of recordings, days of classes, and in each one, the same pattern. Veronica, sweet and attentive with Beatrice and other students from wealthy families, but cruel, sarcastic and humiliating with Julia and other scholarship students. Comments about worn-out clothes, messy hair, lateness caused by broken-down buses, and projects made with simple materials because that was all those children had access to. There was a specific moment that made Robert shut his eyes, squeezing them tight. It was the scene from the math test. Veronica's voice saying in front of the entire class, "Look everyone, Julia can't even do a basic addition problem. Maybe math is too difficult for her. Maybe she should go back to a simpler school where the level is more suited to her abilities." The embarrassed silence that followed, and then quietly, almost imperceptibly, Beatrice's voice whispering to someone, "Don't cry, Julia, you're smart, don't believe what she's saying." Robert turned off the recorder. His hands were shaking. He felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. The woman who shared his bed, who made breakfast every morning, who kissed his forehead before he slept, whom he had introduced to friends and family as the person who helped him start over after Marina's death. This woman was an abuser. She was humiliating vulnerable children, using her power as a teacher to destroy the self-esteem of boys and girls who already came from such difficult backgrounds. And he, Robert, had funded it all. His money had gone to that school, to that foundation, with the promise of helping children in need. And in the end, what was happening? These children were being emotionally tortured while he believed he was doing good. The cruel irony of the situation hit him with full force. He had been so proud of being a benefactor, of using his wealth to create opportunities. But in reality, he had just been a fool, an idiot who couldn't see what was happening right under his own nose. He needed to think, he needed to decide what to do. He looked at the clock. It was past 7 in the evening. Veronica appeared at the office door, knocking lightly. "Honey, dinner's almost ready. Are you coming?" Robert looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he saw a stranger. That face he had kissed so many times, those eyes that seemed so sincere, that mouth that said, "I love you," every night. Who was this woman really? He managed to articulate a response. "I'll be right there. I just need to finish something." Veronica smiled and closed the door. Robert locked the recorder in a drawer and tried to gather his thoughts. He couldn't confront Veronica now, not without a plan. He needed help. He needed to understand the extent of what was happening. This went beyond a teacher being cruel. There was something deeper, more structural. He remembered Gabrielle Montgomery, a lawyer specializing in education law, who had done some work for his company years ago. She was serious, competent, and most importantly, had experience with cases involving abuse in educational institutions. He sent a text to Gabrielle from his phone. "I need an urgent consultation about a delicate case involving my daughter's school. Can you see me tomorrow?" The reply came quickly. "Of course, Robert. My office, 10 a.m. Robert put his phone away and went to dinner, trying to act normal, but every word Veronica said sounded false. Every smile seemed like a mask. Beatrice ate in silence, glancing at her father from time to time, trying to read in his eyes if he had listened, if he had understood. After dinner, when Veronica went to take a shower, Robert called Beatrice into her room. He closed the door and knelt in front of his daughter, holding her small hands. "I heard everything, my love. I heard it all, and you were so brave to show me." Robert saw his daughter's eyes fill with tears. The girl hugged her father tightly and whispered, "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was afraid you'd think I was making it up." Robert held his daughter close. "Never, I would never doubt you. Forgive me for not realizing sooner. Forgive me for not listening when you tried to tell me." That night, Robert barely slept. Lying next to Veronica, who slept peacefully, he stared at the ceiling, processing everything. He thought of Julia, that girl he hardly knew who was part of the project he financed. He thought of how many other children were suffering. He thought of how naive he had been, how he had believed in beautiful speeches without verifying what was actually happening in practice. The next morning, Robert made an excuse about an important meeting and left early. He arrived at Gabrielle Montgomery's office promptly at 10. She received him in a large room with shelves full of law books and an organized desk. Gabrielle was about 45, with graying hair tied in a bun, discreet framed glasses, and a piercing gaze. "Sit down, Robert. Tell me what's happening." Robert took the recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Before you listen to this, you need some context." He told her everything. The move to Pasadena, enrolling Beatrice at Harmony Academy, the investment in the Scholarship Foundation, the relationship with Veronica, Beatrice's perception of how her stepmother treated her scholarship student friend, the girl's decision to record the classes. Gabrielle listened in silence, occasionally taking notes. As Robert played the recordings, Gabrielle's expression grew more and more serious. She would stop him occasionally, ask him to rewind a section, listen again. When the recording finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "Robert, what you've shown me is serious, very serious. This isn't just a matter of a teacher being overly demanding. What's recorded here constitutes psychological harassment, emotional abuse of minors, and possibly socio-economic discrimination. This can and should have legal consequences." Robert felt both relief and terror. Relief because someone confirmed that this was real, that he wasn't exaggerating. Terror because he understood that what came next would be devastating. Gabrielle continued, "Furthermore, there are indications that this isn't an isolated case. You mentioned other scholarship students being treated similarly. This suggests an institutional pattern. The school, the administration, the coordinators, they could all be involved, either actively or through negligence." She opened a folder and took out some documents. "In recent years, I've seen an increase in cases of psychological abuse in private schools that adopt social projects. It's a complex situation. The institution sells an image of inclusion and social responsibility. But in practice, they treat scholarship students like second-class citizens. Teachers and staff reproduce class prejudices, often in a veiled manner, creating a hostile environment for these children." Robert struggled to absorb her words. "So what do I do now?" Gabrielle thought for a moment. "First, we need more evidence. These recordings are an excellent start, but we need additional documentation, school reports, communications between teachers and the administration, testimonies from other staff members if possible. Second, you cannot confront Veronica or the school yet. If we do that rashly, they will close ranks, destroy evidence, and create defensive narratives. We need a strategy." Robert agreed, Gabrielle suggested he maintain his normal routine at home, not letting on that he knew anything, while she began to discreetly investigate Harmony Academy. She also advised him to reach out to other families of scholarship students to try to understand if there were more cases, more victims. "And there's one more thing, Robert," Gabrielle said, looking him directly in the eye. "You mentioned you invest money in this foundation. We need to audit where that money is going. In cases like this, it's common to find financial misconduct, misuse of funds, inflated contracts with shell companies. Moral abuse often goes hand in hand with corruption." That was another stab to the gut. Robert had signed contracts, transferred significant amounts, trusting that everything would be used properly. And now he was discovering he might have been not only naive about the treatment of the children, but also the victim of a financial scheme. Gabrielle saw his expression and softened her tone. "I know this is a lot to process, but you are doing the right thing. Many parents, upon discovering something like this, prefer to look the other way, protect their own image, avoid scandal. You are choosing to protect these children. That is rare and important." Robert left Gabrielle's office with a heavy heart but with a plan. He returned home to find Beatrice watching. Cartoons in the living room. Veronica had gone out for a meeting at the school. He sat next to his daughter and said, "We're going to fix this, my love. I promise you we will protect Julia and all the other children. But it's going to take a little time, and you need to be patient and brave, okay?" Beatrice looked at her father and nodded seriously. The weight on that 8-year-old's shoulders was immense, but she was willing to carry it if it meant justice for her friend. In the following days, Robert began to move discreetly. Gabrielle had recommended a trusted forensic accountant, Mark Rivers, who started analyzing all the financial documents of the Scholarship Foundation. Robert provided contracts, transfer receipts, and reports the school had sent about the use of funds. Mark worked quickly, and in less than a week returned with disturbing findings. In a meeting at Gabrielle's office, Mark presented his conclusions. "Robert, of the $2 million you've invested in the foundation over the last 8 months, only about 40% actually reached the students in the form of scholarships, school supplies, and uniforms. The rest went to inflated administrative costs, payments to consulting, firms that appear to be shell companies, renovations in areas of the school not used by scholarship students, and the purchase of overpriced equipment." Robert felt his anger boil. They had stolen from him. They had used his money, his genuine desire to help, to enrich themselves at the expense of vulnerable children. Gabrielle added, "And there's more. I've obtained information from a source inside the school, an employee who is willing to talk to us but is afraid of losing her job. She may have valuable information about how the institution operates." The employee was Camille. Gabrielle had gotten her contact through a network of education professionals who shared concerns about abuse in schools. Camille agreed to meet with Robert and Gabrielle at a cafe far from the school on a Saturday morning. When she arrived, she was visibly nervous, looking around, afraid of being recognized. Robert and Gabrielle reassured her, guaranteeing that their conversation would be confidential. Camille began to speak, and it was as if a dam had broken. She told them about everything she had observed in recent months. The differential treatment given to scholarship students, not just by Veronica, but by other teachers as well. The way the pedagogical coordination ignored complaints, the existence of a room officially called the emotional regulation space, but which in practice was used to isolate children considered problematic, especially scholarship students. She took a notebook from her bag and handed it to Robert. "Here are my notes, dates, times, descriptions of situations I witnessed. I tried to take this to the administration, but I was silenced. They told me I was new to the profession, that I didn't understand the school's pedagogical methods, that I was being too sensitive, but I know what I saw. And I know it's wrong." Gabrielle flipped through the notebook. Camille's notes were detailed, precise. There were records of children being kept from recess as punishment for being late, of derogatory comments about their clothes and appearance, of explicit threats about losing their scholarships. There were also screenshots of emails exchanged between members of the school administration, where they discussed ways to justify foundation expenses, mentioned intermediary companies, and talked about keeping the numbers looking good for investors. Robert looked at Camille with gratitude. "Do you have any idea the risk you're taking by showing us this?" Camille nodded. "I do. But I can't sleep at night anymore knowing I'm complicit in this. I became a teacher to help children, not to watch them be destroyed. If I lose my job, so be it. But I can't stay silent any longer." Gabrielle assured Camille they would do everything to protect her legally, that she would be considered a good-faith whistleblower, and that there were laws to protect her from retaliation. She also explained that the material she had provided, combined with Beatrice's recordings and the financial audit, formed a robust body of evidence. "We're ready to act," Gabrielle said, "but we need to do this strategically. I'm going to file a complaint with the district attorney's office, requesting a full investigation of the school. We will also notify the Department of Education and Child Protective Services. This is going to become a public case, Robert. Are you prepared for that?" Robert thought of Beatrice, of Julia, of all those children who woke up afraid to go to school, who came home with their self-esteem shattered. He thought of Marina, how devastated she would be if she knew her husband had been complicit, even unwittingly, in this kind of abuse. "I'm prepared," he said. "Do what's necessary." That evening, Robert returned home to find Veronica preparing dinner, humming a soft tune. She smiled when she saw him and came to give him a welcome kiss. Robert reciprocated mechanically, feeling a revulsion he had to hide. "How was your day, love?" she asked. "Productive," he replied. "Very productive." During dinner, Beatrice watched her father, trying to understand what was happening. Robert gave his daughter a discreet smile, one that said, "Everything is moving forward, hang in there." Veronica talked about her plans for the week, about a school field trip, about how proud she was of Beatrice's performance. Every word sounded grotesque to Robert, who now saw the falsehood in every gesture, every phrase. After Beatrice went to bed, Veronica hugged Robert on the sofa and said, "You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay?" He lied. "Just stress from work." She kissed his neck. "You work too much. You need to relax." Robert felt a shiver of disgust, but controlled himself. Soon, very soon, this charade would be over. And when it was, Veronica and everyone responsible for this cruel system would answer for what they had done. The following Monday, Gabrielle filed the complaint with the district attorney's office. The document was over 50 pages long, detailing all the abuses, attaching transcribed recordings, financial reports, Camille's notes, and testimonies Robert had managed to collect from 2 other families of scholarship students who had also noticed improper treatment. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Dr. Frank Costello, read the material and was shocked by the extent and systematic nature of the abuse. Simultaneously, the Department of Education was notified and launched a surprise inspection at Harmony Academy. Inspectors showed up unannounced, requested access to documents, interviewed staff members separately, and observed classes. The school administration panicked. Dr. Meadows tried to control the situation, but it was clear something very serious was happening. It was on a Wednesday, exactly 15 days after Robert had first listened to the recordings, that everything exploded. The district attorney's office issued a temporary restraining order against Veronica and Principal Sylvia Meadows, prohibiting them from having any contact with students while the investigation proceeded. The news leaked to the press. Local newspaper headlines screamed, "Elite school investigated for psychological abuse against scholarship students. Teacher accused of humiliating underprivileged children." Veronica received the official notification in the middle of the afternoon. She came home pale, trembling, with the crumpled papers in her hands. Robert was waiting for her in the living room. When she entered, she looked at her husband and understood everything. "You," she whispered. "It was you who did this." Robert stood up, looked her in the eye and said, his voice firm, coming from a deep place of anger and disappointment, "No, you did this. I just made sure you would pay for it." Veronica dropped her purse on the floor. Her eyes, which always seemed so controlled, so calculated, now showed pure panic. Robert, this is absurd. You don't understand. I was trying to educate these children, to give them the tools to survive in a difficult world. If I was harsh at times, it was because I had to be. They come from backgrounds with no discipline, no structure. Robert felt the anger rise like a wave. No discipline. Julia wakes up before 5 in the morning to help her sick grandmother, takes 2 buses to get to school, and you think she needs discipline? You humiliated an 8-year-old child because her uniform was wrinkled, because she didn't have expensive supplies, because she had the audacity to exist in the same space as the children of the rich. That's not education, Veronica. That's cruelty. Veronica tried to approach him, but Robert took a step back. No, he said. Don't try to manipulate me now. I heard everything, every poisonous word, every humiliation, every threat. Our daughter, an 8-year-old child, had to hide a recorder in her backpack because she knew no one would believe her if she told. You created such an environment of fear that even Beatrice was afraid to talk to me. Tears began to stream down Veronica's face, but Robert felt no pity. They were the tears of someone who had been caught, not someone who was remorseful. You need to leave this house today, he said. I've already packed your things. They're in the guest room. You can take everything tomorrow morning, but tonight you're going to a hotel. I don't want you sleeping under the same roof as my daughter. Veronica still tried to argue, to say it was all a misunderstanding, that she could explain, that he was being influenced by people who didn't understand the context. But Robert didn't listen anymore. He picked up the phone and called a taxi. 15 minutes later, Veronica walked out the door with a small suitcase, casting one last look at the house that had been her home for nearly a year. The door closed behind her, and Robert felt as if an immense weight had been lifted from the room. He went up to Beatrice's room. The girl was awake, sitting on her bed, hugging her teddy bear. Did you hear, Dad? Did you hear everything? Robert sat beside her and hugged his daughter. I heard, my love, and Veronica is gone. She's not going to live here anymore. She's not going to be your teacher anymore, and she's not going to hurt anyone ever again. Beatrice started to cry, but they were tears of relief, a release of all the tension she had carried for months. Did I do the right thing, Dad? Was I right to record it? Robert kissed his daughter's forehead. You did the rightest, most courageous thing anyone could do. You saved your friend and many other children. I'm so proud of you. I can't even put it into words. In the days that followed, the case grew to enormous proportions. The district attorney's investigation deepened, and more evidence emerged. Other teachers from Harmony Academy were suspended. The financial audit revealed it wasn't just $2 million, but nearly $5 million over 3 years that had been embezzled or misused. Principal Sylvia Meadows had a network of shell companies that received payments for services never rendered. Veronica received secret bonuses for every scholarship student who dropped out or was expelled, as this freed up foundation resources for other purposes. Child Protective Services interviewed several students, including Julia. The girl, initially frightened, was supported by specialized psychologists who helped her talk about what she had experienced. She told them about the times she went without food because she was banned from recess, about the days she came home crying because she had been humiliated in front of her classmates, about the constant fear of losing the scholarship that was her only chance for a better education. 6 other families of scholarship students joined the complaint. Each told similar stories. Children being treated as second-class citizens, used as negative examples, punished for things that paying students did without consequence. A 9-year-old boy recounted being locked in the emotional regulation room for 2 hours because he complained he was hungry. A 7-year-old girl said a teacher told her she smelled bad and should take a shower before coming to school, humiliating her in front of the whole class. The prosecution built a solid case. In addition to criminal charges of child abuse and psychological mistreatment, there was the lawsuit for embezzlement, conspiracy, and fraud. The school tried to defend itself, hired expensive lawyers, attempted to discredit the evidence, and claimed the recordings were illegal. But Gabrielle countered every argument. The recordings were made by a child in legitimate defense of another child, in an environment that should have been safe, but was a stage for systematic abuse. Any judge with a modicum of sensitivity would understand that this evidence was not only valid, but essential. The case went to trial 6 months later. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, parents, educators, child rights activists, everyone wanted to follow it. Robert was there with Beatrice, who had insisted on coming. Julia was with Mrs. Evans, who had taken a day off work for the first time in years to be present. Camille was at the back of the room, nervous but determined. The recordings were played in court. Every cruel word from Veronica echoed through the walls of that solemn room. Many people cried as they listened. The judge, Judge Michael Brandon, a man in his 60s with a long career dedicated to defending children's rights, listened with an increasingly grave expression. When it came to the part where Veronica said Julia didn't deserve the scholarship, that she should go back to a simpler school, that she was too stupid for math, the judge had to pause the playback for a moment, visibly shaken. The witnesses were heard. Camille recounted everything she had seen, presented her notes, and explained how she had tried to report it internally but was silenced. Other school employees, encouraged by Camille's example, began to speak up as well. A janitor told of seeing children crying alone in the emotional regulation room. A substitute teacher said he had been reprimanded by the administration when he tried to treat scholarship students with the same attention he gave the others. Robert testified about how he had been deceived, about how he had invested millions believing he was helping children, when in fact he was funding a system of abuse and corruption. His voice broke at times, especially when he described Beatrice's courage in secretly recording the classes. Beatrice did not testify formally because she was too young, but the judge spoke with her privately in a reserved setting. The girl told him why she had decided to record, how she had seen her friend suffering every day, how she couldn't bear to watch it anymore. The judge, as Gabrielle later reported, was deeply touched by the maturity and sense of justice of this child. Julia also spoke with the judge in private. She told him about the days of fear, about coming home and crying in her grandmother's arms, about thinking of dropping out of school because she couldn't take the humiliation anymore. But she also told him about Beatrice, about how her friend had been her light in those dark days, about how grateful she was to have had someone who believed in her when all the adults seemed blind. Veronica's defense tried to argue that she was just a dedicated teacher using traditional disciplinary methods, that she was the victim of a persecution orchestrated by a resentful ex-partner. But the argument sounded hollow against the evidence. The recordings didn't lie. The financial reports clearly showed the embezzlement. The testimonies of multiple witnesses confirmed a systematic pattern of abuse. After a 3-week trial, the judge delivered his sentence. Veronica Lester was sentenced to 4 years in prison for child mistreatment, plus 6 years on parole for her part in the embezzlement scheme. She was permanently banned from holding any position related to education. Principal Sylvia Meadows received an even harsher sentence, 8 years in prison for the financial crimes and 4 years for negligence and complicity in the abuses, to be served consecutively. Other involved staff members were also convicted or agreed to plea bargains. The school's operating license was indefinitely suspended. The building was confiscated as part of the restitution for the embezzled funds, and here began the part that Robert considered the most important, the transformation. Robert could have just sued the school to get his money back and move on. But he had learned something fundamental in those months, that money without supervision, without real involvement, without true commitment, changes nothing. So he made a proposal to the district attorney's office and the judge. He wanted to use the confiscated building plus additional personal funds to create a truly transformative educational center. But this time, it would be different. It wouldn't be him, a wealthy businessman, dictating how things should be done. It would be a project built jointly with committed educators, psychologists specializing in childhood trauma, social workers, and, most importantly, with the active participation of the children's families. Camille, who had lost her job at Harmony Academy but had gained national recognition as a courageous whistleblower, was invited to coordinate the pedagogical project. The new center, named the Hope Institute, opened its doors 1 year after the trial. It was no longer a private school with a token social project. It was a non-profit, community-based institution with transparent and participatory management. It served children from all social classes, with priority given to those in vulnerable situations. There were no expensive uniforms, no inaccessible materials, no division between scholarship and paying students. All children were treated with the same dignity, the same respect, the same attention. The Institute offered free psychological support for all children, especially those who had suffered trauma in other schools. It had a community library, a shared garden, art workshops, and a sports court open to the community on weekends. Teachers were selected not only for their technical competence, but for their genuine commitment to inclusive and respectful education. A board composed of educators, parents, older students, and community members supervised everything, ensuring that the space would never again be a stage for abuse. Julia was one of the first students enrolled. Mrs. Evans cried on opening day, holding Robert's hands and thanking him repeatedly. She had no words to express what it meant to see her granddaughter, who had been so hurt, now attending a place where she was valued, where she could be a child, where she could dream. Beatrice also studied at the Institute. Her friendship with Julia had grown even stronger through everything they had been through. The two girls, so different in their origins but so similar in courage and kindness, became inseparable. Beatrice learned from Julia about resilience, about fighting even when all seems lost. Julia learned from Beatrice that true friendship doesn't see social class, that there are good people in the world willing to risk everything for what is right. Robert changed profoundly. The businessman who once delegated everything, who believed money alone solved problems, became a present, involved manager. He visited the Institute several times a week, talked with teachers, students, and families. He learned the names of all the children, knew their stories, celebrated their achievements. He discovered that his true wealth was not in his bank accounts, but in the real difference he could make in real people's lives. 2 years after the sentencing, on a sunny November afternoon, the Institute held a year-end performance. The children had prepared plays, dances, and musical presentations. Julia, who was once shy and withdrawn, was on stage singing a song she had written herself about overcoming adversity. Her voice, once so soft and insecure, now echoed clear and confident through the auditorium. Robert watched. From the audience next to Beatrice, he looked at his daughter, who was applauding her friend enthusiastically, and felt his heart swell with pride. That 8-year-old girl had possessed a courage many adults lack. She had seen an injustice and decided to act, even knowing it could cost a great deal. And because of her, dozens of children now had a different future. After the performance, Julia ran to hug Beatrice and Robert. Mrs. Evans followed close behind, smiling. The grandmother had found a better job with a formal contract and benefits after one of the Institute's mothers, who owned a cleaning company, heard her story and hired her under dignified conditions. Life for Mrs. Evans and Julia was still not easy, but it was infinitely better than before. Camille approached the group, carrying a folder. "I have some news," she said, smiling. "The Department of Education got in touch. They want to use our Institute's model as a reference for a national policy to combat abuse in schools. We're giving a presentation in Washington, D.C. next month." Robert felt a deep emotion. What had started with a little girl hiding a recorder in her backpack was turning into something much bigger, something that could protect children across the country. That night at home, Robert put Beatrice to bed. As he arranged his daughter's blanket, she said, "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of me?" Robert felt his eyes burn. "Your mother would be more than proud, my love. She taught you to be kind, to defend those in need, to never stay silent in the face of injustice. You have honored every lesson she gave you." Beatrice smiled and closed her eyes, finally at peace with everything she had lived through. Robert went down to the living room, poured himself a coffee, and stared out the window at the garden. He thought about how life had taken unexpected turns. He had lost Marina, been deceived by Veronica, and had nearly been complicit in a cruel system. But in the midst of so much pain and disappointment, he had discovered something precious, that true redemption comes from acknowledging mistakes and working actively to fix them. The Hope Institute didn't erase the suffering that Julia and the other children had endured. Nothing could erase that. But it offered something equally important, the certainty that their pain had not been in vain, that it had served to create something good, something that would protect other children from going through the same thing. 5 years after the sentencing, Julia was 13 and in the 8th grade. She was an eloquent, self-assured teenager with excellent grades. She had discovered a passion for law and psychology and dreamed of becoming a lawyer specializing in the defense of children. She wanted to be for others what Beatrice and Robert had been for her, a voice that believes, that fights, that doesn't give up. Beatrice, also 13, had developed a talent for communication. She participated in talks about bullying and school abuse, telling her story to audiences of educators and parents, always emphasizing that children can and should speak up when they see injustice. Her dream was to study investigative journalism, to use communication as a tool for social justice. The two friends remained inseparable. They studied together, dreamed together, and planned how to make the world a better place. They were living proof that true friendship transcends all barriers, and that courage can be born in the most unlikely of hearts. Robert, now 49, had become a recognized activist in the field of children's rights and transparency in educational institutions. He gave lectures across the country, helped other families who discovered abuse in schools, and financed projects similar to the Hope Institute in other cities. He had found a purpose that went far beyond profits and balance sheets. Veronica was serving her sentence in a semi-open prison. She had participated in rehabilitation programs, undergone therapy, and, according to reports, had finally confronted her own cruelty. In a letter she sent to Robert years later, she apologized for the suffering she caused, acknowledging that she had been driven by deep-seated prejudices she had never questioned. She didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted him to know she had changed. Robert never replied to the letter, but he kept it, not as an absolution, but as a reminder that even people who cause great harm can eventually see their mistakes. On a Saturday afternoon, 10 years after that first recording hidden in a school pencil case, Robert and Beatrice visited Marina's grave. They brought fresh flowers and tended to the space with care. Beatrice, now an 18-year-old young woman about to start college, knelt and said softly, "Mum, I think you'd be proud of how things turned out. Dad and I learned that loving is also about fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. I hope you're at peace." Robert placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Marina would be proud not just of the outcome, but of the journey. You honored her memory with every choice you made, Bea. Every day you chose courage over silence, justice over convenience. Beatrice looked at her father and smiled. We honored her, Dad, together. And so the story that began with pain, loss, and abuse ended with transformation, hope, and justice. Because in the end, as Robert learned, in a painful but definitive way, the true legacy we leave is not in the money we accumulate or the position we hold. It's in the lives we touch, the injustices we fight, and the courage we have to listen to the most fragile voices and act in their defense. Julia, Beatrice, Robert, Camille, Mrs. Evans, each of them learned that justice is not something that falls from the sky. It is built day by ordinary people who refuse to pretend they don't see the suffering of others. It is fueled by the courage of a child who hides a recorder in her backpack because she believes her friend deserves dignity. It is sustained by the determination of a father who chooses truth over comfort. It is strengthened by the bravery of an employee who risks her job to do what is right. And in the end, it is this web of small individual acts of courage that transforms the world, one act at a time, one child at a time, one injustice undone at a time. Because if there's one thing this story teaches, it's that no one is too small or too weak to make a difference. All it takes is the courage to press the record button when everyone else prefers silence. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Beatrice, and Julia has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by the courage of this girl who did not remain silent in the face of injustice, please click the like button right now. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the truest and bravest side of the human soul. And tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed a situation of injustice that left a mark on you? What did you do about it? Your story could inspire others to act as well. Every day we bring intense narratives like this one, showing how the courage of a single person can transform the lives of many others. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the world we live in.